an Egyptian beginning to investigating the wellsprings of the Nile. Verifiable records demonstrate that there was contact between the old Egyptians and regions situated in the south of Egypt, the nations of Cush, Yam, and Dropkick, which is logical that a few Egyptians know about the Bahr el Ghazal locale, one of the feeders of the Nile in South Sudan, since the hours of the Old Realm, and because of the Egyptians' perception to enter into Nubia and Sudan. Voyagers and pilgrims showed up in the 6th tradition, the majority of them the sovereigns of Aswan in southern Egypt. The leader of the south, named Harkhoff, coordinated 4 undertakings to Africa on the sets of the rulers Marinare and Pepi II, around 2200 BC, and Harkhoff was quick to keep current realities of his movements in his burial place in Aswan, as in this selection from a full text cited in French about the Old Egyptian language by the researcher Claire Lalouette in her review. Pharaohs in the realm of Egypt at the hour of the lords of the divine beings. His Highness Marinare sent me, in the organization of my dad, the main companion, and the cleric Saint Mary, to the place that is known for sweet potato to investigate its ways, and I finished this responsibility in somewhere around 7 months, bringing from it different delightful and uncommon types of presents, and got for this all recognition. The Nile is the ruler of life. The Egyptians saw the flooding of the Nile and its downfall at proper times so that the place where there is Egypt could profit from it, as it floods in the mid-year and the land is needing water, flooding it and restoring its life, and it retreats all at once appropriate for farming, planting grain. So it was the start of the Egyptians' transformation to the possibility of the schedule. The Egyptians created what is known as the Nile schedule, which starts with the start of the flood, when the water arrives at a significant key region, and researchers accept that it was a region in the urban communities of Uno and Enbihaj, as the Egyptians noticed the combination of the occasion with a heavenly peculiarity, the presence of the star of Yemeni verse. The French researcher Nicolas Grimel says in his review, "The historical backdrop of antiquated Egypt, the beginning stage for deciding the start of the new year was to quantify the level of the rising waters, and what is recorded at the level of the city of Mnf, which is the land that saw the unification of the nation, apparently, and completely predictable with the presence of the star of Yemeni verse, as per the Julian schedule. And this peculiarity happens on July 19th. Egyptian space experts counted the quantity of days between every appearance of the star and tracked down 365 days, partitioned them into a year, and furthermore isolated the year into 3 seasons decided in view of the states of the Nile. Act. The time of flooding and planting seeds, from mid-July to mid-November. Bert. The developing season, comparing to the colder time of year season, beginning from mid-November to mid-Wak, and Shma. The collect season, from mid-Wak to mid-July. What was on the feasting table of the antiquated Egyptians? The Nile assisted the Egyptians with framing little networks, whose individuals collaborate in the development of their territories, and some of the time they depended on extending their boundaries by holding on to the terrains of adjoining networks, until these networks combined and shaped a bigger substance joined during the rule of Lord Narmer Mina, and the first strategically and socially interconnected type of Egyptian grounds seemed thanks to the Nile. The Egyptians likewise knew, other than farming, which relied upon the waters of the Nile, fishing, so they imagined boats for the purpose of fishing and transportation, recorded many water scenes on the walls of burial chambers, inside which Nile fish were put to make contributions to the departed in the other world. How the ancient Egyptians revered the immortal river. Long experienced the ideal god, who is in the mother, he is the food of Egypt, its food and its arrangements, he permits each man to live, overflow is coming, food is on his fingers, and when he returns, Individuals celebrate, all individuals. A psalm composed by the old Egyptian in his scholarly texts features the degree of his appreciation to the Nile stream, making him the maker, God, of Egypt, giving life and everlasting status to her since old times. The Egyptians understood the significance of the Nile since old times, so they endeavored to imagine ways pointed toward exploiting the stream's water, arranging water system and digging channels to develop however much region of the valley as could reasonably be expected, and the French researcher Jacques Vandier didn't misrepresent in his review Starvation in Old Egypt, when he called attention to that. The Nile is the premise on which the material and public activity in Egypt depended. The start. The components of human existence were accessible in the North African area during the Paleolithic period, because of the development of grasses and trees and the settlement of groups of deer, cows, and sheep, so man depended on hunting them utilizing crude machines, a considerable lot of which were tracked down in the eastern and western deserts of Egypt. Nonetheless, climatic changes pushed the populace towards the streams, because of dry spell and the shortage of downpours, so another kind of social orders arose in Egypt, a type of crude life whose roots and the most seasoned ideas and divine beings presumably date back to the early Neolithic time frame since around 5800 BC, particularly in the Fayum, Marmada and Omari locales in Focal and northern Egypt, and Hamamia, Badari and Tassa in the ancestral face south. What does Nile mean? The old Egyptians called the Nile waterway in the Old Egyptian language, Etroa, meaning the incomparable waterway, and the semantic starting points of the word Nile show that it is of Greek beginning, Nilos, notwithstanding, others have discussed Phoenician beginnings of the word got from the Semitic word Nahl, importance, stream or waterway. The Greek student of history Diodorus Siculus went considerably further when he brought up that the Nile was named this name in memory of a ruler named Nilus, who rose the privileged position of the nation and dug endlessly channels, so the Egyptians named his name on their stream, and Nilus is utilized as a manly legitimate name as per an agreement of offer composed on a papyrus tracing all the way back to Roman times, kept by the Egyptian gallery, between a man named Nilus and one more, named Isidorus. The Egyptian researcher Ramadan Abdo, in his all-encompassing review, The Progress of Old Egypt, inside the distributions of the Egyptian service of relics, accepts that the word Nile is gotten from a profound Egyptian beginning from the expression na-etro, and that implies waterway with branches. The Egyptians likewise referred to the riverbed as habit and etro, riverbed, and they referred to the parts of the Nile and the place where there is Egypt as etro nokmet, parts of the dark earth. The Holy Nile. The Egyptians took a gander at the Nile with a heavenly eye, involved the waters of the waterway for decontamination, for performing strict ceremonies and washing the departed. Washing with Nile water was a need of Egyptian life as a sort of tidiness and physical and profound decontamination, and a cycle conveys two implications, genuine and emblematic. In the Egyptian heart, the genuine incorporates the neatness of the body, dress, food and lodging as well as refinement as a need to perform strict customs. The representative incorporates the otherworldly virtue of the spirit from each impurity. The veneration of the Nile arose through the Egyptian perception to refine the stream water from all contamination, as a consecrated obligation, and whoever dirties this water is dependent upon discipline for disregarding the fury of the divine beings on Day of Atonement. Furthermore, that's what an old text shows. Whoever contaminates the Nile water will get the fury of the divine beings. And the Egyptian affirmed in his denialist admissions in the other world that he didn't forestall the progression of water for good, as expressed in part 125 of the text. Exit to the Day, Book of the Dead. citing the French interpretation of the researcher Paul Barguet. I didn't forestall the water in its season, I didn't dirty the stream water, I didn't forestall flooding. In his season, I didn't put a dam for running water, I gave bread to the hungry and I gave water to the parched. How excellent expressions featured the appeal and engaging quality of old Egyptian ladies. The Frenchman vandier expresses that in old Egyptian strict idea, water addresses the fundamental component from which new life arises, and the sun passes into the timeless sea at dusk, to imbue another dynamic power into it. The old Egyptians devoted various masters related with the Nile waterway, the most popular of which is the god Habi, who addresses the yearly flooding of the Nile, the wellspring of the main life overall, the start of creation, and the wellspring of the principal life of the antiquated Egyptian. Habi was portrayed as the expert of contributions, and the main job as a symbol was the encapsulation of the Nile flood, and he was referenced a ton in the supposed Nile tunes, and in side passages in the texts of the final resting places. He was likewise called the expert of the flood, everlasting ruler maker, ruler of lords, and the most established of the rulers. He was additionally depicted as the expert of all, who makes balance in the universe. The earliest appearance of the icon Habi as a flood god traces all the way back to the Old Realm, and the most seasoned portrayal of him traces all the way back to the rule of ruler Sneferu, and starting from the start of the 5th tradition, Habi started to be portrayed among the fruitfulness masters in the sanctuary of Lord Sahur, as portrayed as a full-bodied man with 2 enormous bosoms streaming water, as an image of ripeness and development, and pictures holding blossoms, poultry, fish, vegetables and natural products, or lotus bloom, the symbol of Upper Egypt, and papyrus plant, the insignia of Lower Egypt. Psalms of the Nile. Among these strict commendations is a text tracing all the way back to the center realm that expresses recognition to you, my affection, who emerges from the earth, and comes to re-establish life to Egypt. And in somewhere else the old Egyptian acclaims the Nile and calls it to flood, saying, O vegetation, I wish you would come. O my adoration, may you come to Egypt. O maker of contributions, O greener of the 2 banks, to give life to individuals and creatures from your items from the fields, O greener, may you come. As the text of a tribute in the Turin Papyrus, tracing all the way back to the 19th line, the interpretation of which was cited by the Egyptian researcher Ramadan Abdo in his review. The Progress of Old Egypt says, He is the person who floods the fields, he is the animal of Ra, the sun god, to take care of the dairy cattle, and he is the person who inundates the desert land a long way from water. His water tumbles from the sky, he brings food, he has large amounts of food, he makes everything great, and individuals acclaim him. The Nile and Egyptian Romantic Tales. The Nile showed up unequivocally in numerous scholarly scenes recorded by Egyptian writing, everything being equal, particularly the Ghazal sonnets that seem beginning from 1500 BC, a period when customs were freed, and the time of the Ramesses is exactly the period when individual verse was sent off liberated from all limitations. The French researcher Claire Lalouette, in her review, Hallowed Messages and Common Messages, inside the UNESCO series of Models of World Idea, recommends that these sonnets were discussed during meals, joined by music on woodwind and gong instruments, and records wonderful stanzas recorded by pieces found for the outer layer of a container, protected in the Egyptian gallery, in which the Nile is emphatically present in a desirous scene. Dear, how I might want to leave, to go down to the stream and clean up before you. I'm allowing you to watch my magnificence, and I'm in my jeans, made of regal cloth, more slender, I'm scented with easygoing, I plunge into the water close to you, for your affection. I come out holding a red fish between my fingers. Old buddy, my darling, come and watch me.